Well, welcome back. Unfortunately, Dr. Mokhtar Gambou, Morocco's permanent representative to the United Nations Environmental Program, who was scheduled to speak at this time, cannot join us. So instead, we're going to take a few minutes to learn about robotics' role in sustainability. And with that, we also wrap up Wall Street Green Digital's decarbonization initiatives sessions. And I want to thank Peter and Robin for inviting me to moderate these fascinating discussions. Folks, stay tuned also for a sponsored conversation between author David Kirkpatrick and Doug McKeague, who is editor in chief of The Climate Capitalist, about what happened at Climate Week in New York and looking ahead to COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan. Thanks, everyone, for your attention. Now let's talk robots.
Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to Wall Street Green Digital. You know that we've been across the globe looking for the best climate tech solutions and how to get them funded. And then it occurred to me, we hadn't been talking about the role of robotics in the climate arena. So I invited a good friend and longtime confidant, Oliver Mitchell, to join us today because he's with FFVC, a venture capital firm, but knows a tremendous amount about the role of robots, and in particular, in helping us get to a more sustainable planet. Oliver, welcome.
Thank you so much, Robin. I'm very excited to talk today about the role of robots in sort of advancing the sustainability goals that we have set out for ourselves, both globally and specifically United States. I'm just going to bring up a presentation that I've prepared today for our audience. It's really amazing, the Wall Street Green Digital community and what you're doing. And I think that it's really great to have robots as part of the conversation, because robots and automation in particular can make sustainability, renewable energy, and climate solutions more affordable, accelerating adoption, and getting consumers to be able to not have this big debate whether climate change is man-made or it doesn't exist at all, but it's just part of our life in solving problems in a real way. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about, the sustainability goals, but just why should you listen to me in the first place? Because Robin called me up and we knew each other from a previous life. Well, that too, but I'm also an author of a book called A Startup Field Guide in the Age of Robots and AI, which will be out later this year, where I've interviewed 30 of the leading luminaries in the space and how they're tackling some of the greatest challenges that we have today. I'm a VC, as Robin mentioned, in FF Venture Capital. And while we're a generalist fund, we have a number of technologies, whether in cellular agriculture, in robotics, that I'm going to walk you through today, that are really tackling some of the toughest problems around climate change and achieving and disrupting industries that have for so long have been removed from the conversation. I also host an event every year called the Drones Robotics AI Summit that brings together policymakers, innovators, and investors. I write lots of trade periodicals for the Robot Report. I sit on a bunch of boards, as you can see, some companies represented there. I'm a professor at the SciSim School of Business. And if you'd like to connect with me offline, you can go on the right there and go to my LinkedIn via the QR code. So in looking at the UN sustainability goals, there are 17 listed here. I'm not going to tackle world peace or how to combat poverty, but I'm going to focus on 4 of them for our discussion today. I'm going to focus on food scarcity, or more just the food demand as we get 9 billion people on this planet. And how do we create a supply chain that feeds them in an efficient way? Secondly, I'm going to focus on renewable energy and how we can make it more affordable so it can really tackle some of the biggest problems that we have. As you know, with a lot of the advanced technologies, whether it was AI or crypto, we are consuming an immense amount of energy just to fulfill those. It was reported in the Wall Street Journal about 2 weeks ago that one simple email that ChatGPT drafts leads to equals, 1 bottle of water just in cooling for energy consumption. Third, I'm going to talk about building more sustainable urban and suburban communities and tackling some of the biggest challenges as I sit here in a metropolis of New York City. And finally, and a little out of order, I'm going to end with the future of industry and some of the technologies on the forefront that we're currently using and what is coming down the pike. So starting with agriculture, we have to really be honest with ourselves that today in the United States, more than half of our food comes from outside of the United States that's imported in, specifically produce, like fruits and berries. And why is that so? Well, because it is currently extremely tough for farmers to make the margins they need to survive. And because the costs of running a farm in California or across the United States are constantly rising, added by inflationary pressures and huge labor shortages. So they're often going to buy goods from Latin America and Central America. Why is that bad? I can get strawberries all year round. I don't have to wait to the summer months. Well, those countries tend to have higher levels of pesticides, and they don't have the chemical regulatory demands that a country like the United States has. This also creates increased energy load on those local communities, leading to havoc in their environmental systems, such as waste and runoff, leading to huge hazards of mudslides and fires. And of course, they're losing a lot of that historical character that makes you want to go to those places, whether in Costa Rica or Ecuador. But our portfolio company, Burrow, is able to utilize robotics to make a farm not just more sustainable, but more profitable. So how does Burrow work? It turns a farm into an Amazon fulfillment center. See, most of the innovation to date in agriculture has been around wheat and corn. But as you can see here, in vineyards and orchards and berries, they are using robots to be able to tow and gather goods into one central location. So it used to be that those pickers would have to go down the rows and walk almost 3 football fields in length with an empty bin, go to where they left off picking those blueberries, and then walk again those 3 football fields. In fact, most of their day was spent walking and carrying these heavy loads, whether on a wheelbarrow, and by the way, burro is Spanish for donkey, versus having the autonomy of a robot that is going up and down the rows, going to where the picker is, gathering all those crops in that inventory and bringing it to a central point where it's shipped off and distributed to the consumer. You can see on the left the size of the farm and how it's working in a vineyard, and on the right you can see the blueberry farm right there and then. Next area that I'd like to discuss is renewable energy. Without government subsidies today, renewable energy could not exist. Speaking specifically about solar, about 1/3 of the cost of solar goes into constructing solar farms. But what happens if you could use robots to bring down those costs? So constructing a solar farm could be even more cost effective than oil and gas. Well, one of the biggest roadblocks in solar is surveying, is layout. And because not too many people are going into cartography as a career anymore, and they have a huge amount of retirement happening post-pandemic. So getting a team of surveyors in the Mojave Desert at 110-degree heat takes a long time. And there's a lot of them. They cost a lot. They make mistakes and they move very slowly. But what Civ Robotics does, it is able to autonomously survey and lay out a solar farm with great precision at 10 times the speed and at half the cost of a human surveyor. As you can see, rather than having a team of 20 surveyors, you have one person with a hammer and a stake going to where the laser dot is, or where the paint sprays with great accuracy. Another company in our portfolio that is solving sort of the problems around urban traffic planning is Mana. Here in New York, we are overwhelmed with Uber drivers and Lyft, as well as e-bikes and scooters. And it's causing accidents at great numbers to our most vulnerable new residents and people that live on the margins. It's also really inefficient, when you think about food delivery. But what happens when you could use drones? And this is happening today in the UK, as well as the Dallas area, where they can order their food and within minutes, it could go from the stove into a drone and then to the backyard. As you can see on the left, the woman goes to her app to order it and watches it being delivered. And on the right, the family is getting their dinner delivered to their backyard. This is a safer way to do food delivery at scale. It creates it more in a centralized point. And ironically, the number one thing ordered on Mana, Robin, is hot coffee. So if you think about people going in their car to drive to Starbucks, now that car is running at 1/5 capacity to go down 2 miles when you can order it on a drone. That to me seems like a much more sustainable way of getting coffee into your hand. Finally, Robin, I want to talk to you about manufacturing and our insatiable appetite for, inexpensive goods, which leads to offshoring manufacturing to areas where they could get labor the cheapest, leading to high levels of pollution. This is a snapshot of Guangdong, where I used to make toys in China. That's what it looked like, with lots of people and lots of hands doing the work, all day long, sitting in those chairs. And there's lots of jobs that are dull, dirty, and dangerous that robots can do. One of them is manufacturing, where we can upscale people, where these robots can now make, baby bottles in a much more efficient way, in a cleaner way, and bring it closer to the consumer. This is making, the US more competitive, and it's enabling our supply chain to be not just more sustainable, but enable us in the risks of a future pandemic to be closer and to be able to manage it better and more efficiently. As you can see, you can pick up transparent and translucent objects. So where does this all lead eventually? Well, I'd like to close to give you a peek at what the future looks like. Humanoids. Now, this won't happen tomorrow, Robin, but in the next 10 years, if you think about our world, it is made for humans. And there's lots of jobs that are just too dangerous for us to continue, whether that's lifting very heavy items that leads to higher levels of worker comp claims, or very toxic areas, whether that's, in construction, in mining, even in space. You'll see humanoids in the future. There's a large amount of investment today for Gen AI and large language models, and combining that with mechatronics and hardware. So I'll pause there and let you ask me any questions.
First of all, that was fantastic. I would have never guessed coffee, but being the drone deliveries darling. But I have two questions for you, and one is just a little bit of your knowledge, like so that our audience understands the pieces that come together for a robot. Just AI, vision, the cloud, just sort of what we saw was parts working, the same kind of technologies, reassembled to do different things. Just talk to us a little bit about the technologies.
Sure. Some of the best technologies or best solutions are when you just don't focus on the technology, but you focus on the value proposition.
Yeah.
I think of, Webvan, which was a great dot-com bust. And out of Webvan came Kiva Systems. Mick Mounts was an executive at Webvan in charge of fulfillment, and he saw that it was broken. They were basically taping $50 onto every box going out the door. And so what he was able to do after he left Webvan was create Kiva, which brought the shelving to the picker. So enable that also enabled them to reorganize the warehouse around bestsellers. Eventually, they ended up doing for the top 10% of all e-commerce companies, including diapers.com and Zappos. And when Amazon acquired diapers.com and Zappos, about a year later, they acquired Kiva. And they said, you got to fire all your customers because this is going to be our competitive edge. So what's included in those technologies like Kiva is really the cognitive ability to be able to navigate and avoid obstacles, but also to connect to those best sellers online and reorganize the web, the warehouse around those best sellers online, as well as the mechatronics, the cabling systems to be able to lift up the shelving and bring it to the picker. And so there's lots of different technologies today that bring down those costs. So there's a lot of software, there's a lot of sensors, and there's a lot of gearing. And today, it could not even be more affordable to create technologies and deploy them at great scale because those costs are coming down. And if you think about it, it's amazing because we're collecting an immense amount of data via the cloud that can be distributed everywhere. And if you think about the large foundational language models coupled on top of that, and you think about how great our sensors are, we're walking around with sensors that 10 years ago you could not believe that could fit in your pocket.
So let's talk for a minute about the human side of all this. Forget robots for a minute. The AI prognosticators have said we may lose as much as 1/3 of our current jobs. Add robots on top of that, and we saw one man replacing 20 walking through the field. Do we reskill? What's your vision of what do we do when the robots are doing everything for us?
This is a real debate being played out as we speak between the longshoremen on the East Coast versus the West Coast. Long Beach is fully automated, but on the East Coast, they were striking. The president got involved, and one of the things they don't want is any automation. Well, in Europe and even on the West Coast, they're like, okay, we're not going to be Luddites because we're not going to be able to stop technology. And maybe we don't want to be out, when it's freezing cold in the rain, moving, stuff that's hurting our back and is going to put us out for months on end. Maybe we want to be in climate controlled areas and be able to teleop. But we want the investment in the technology and in ourselves to be able to upscale and retrain on these new technologies. And I think that's where we'll go. There will be some uncomfortable, areas or uncomfortable growing pains in adopting those technologies and getting people to be able to, at the same speed of the adoption, to be able to get into those new, what I call gray collar jobs. They're not blue collar jobs. They're not white collar jobs. They're gray collar. They're managers of machines.
So before we leave, that was a great answer. And before we leave, I just want you to tell everybody the name of your book again and your favorite interview. I know you can't play favorites, but some of the people that you talked to in writing that book.
Absolutely. So the name of my book is A Startup Field Guide in the Age of Robots and AI. I've interviewed people like Rodney Brooks, who's like the godfather of robotics. He was also one of the founders with Helen Grenier of iRobot. I interviewed Nick Radford, who ran the Robonaut or the Humanoid Robotics Lab at NASA. Mick Mounts, the founder of Kiva Systems. Ryan Grebe, who was one of the 3 founders of ClearPath Robotics. So I have some great, anecdotes in the book that really helps a founder going into the space, go from ideation all the way to taking your company public.
Thanks so much, Oliver. Looking forward to reading the book, and thank you for sharing a few of your favorite robots with us. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Robin. I appreciate it.